So I will say to all our audience around the world, welcome to Talking With. Today is Thursday, the 22nd of April, 2021. And my name is Karsten Riise, and I am today talking with Ovigwe Eguegu from Africa, Nigeria. And Ovigwe is a great person and a very wise person. I am very pleased and happy that I know Ovigwe. He's a great friend. And that is the whole idea of this program, that we are talking here as friends. There's no special agenda. We talk about the world. We are talking with different people who are informed about what happens in the world. And what we want to have is different views of the world, and not just views from one part of the world, but from around the world. Ovigwe Eguegu is policy advisor at Development Reimagined. And Ovigwe Eguegu is a geopolitical analyst at Africa and media commentator in the Africa Report and Al Jazeera. And this is one of the ways how I was becoming aware of Ovigwe is through a very good program which he made in Al Jazeera. Ovigwe is a doctor of optometry and postgraduate in peace studies and conflict resolution. So you have a very diverse background, Ovigwe, and this is something which I always appreciate. So thank you, Ovigwe, for coming to this show and sharing 1 hour in discussion here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So I will now pose my only question, which is the only question which is planned in this program. And that is, I will now ask you, Ovigwe, how do you see the world today and tomorrow?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And it's good that you're getting several perspectives on that question, because the way the world is from an African perspective is very different from the way it is from a European perspective, or an Asian. Even within Asia, you do have several of the major powers like Japan, China, India, having their various perspectives as well. But I personally, for me, I think we are always at a crossroad. So the world is always at a crossroad, because at any given time, something can happen and they can change the course of history. So given the current dynamics today, from a political standpoint, we're seeing an increasing security competition between China and the US that is having ripple effect all across the world. We're seeing increased tension with between Russia and NATO, no thanks to Ukraine that is not that is trying to act like a cat's paw, for NATO against Russia. We're also seeing a new U.S. administration trying to reclaim that quote unquote U.S. leadership role in the world. I think today and tomorrow President Biden will be hosting a U.S. climate summit, which surprisingly President Xi Jinping of China is attending. Also Russian Vladimir Putin will be attending to try to see how the world can collaborate on the one issue that every single country, every single individual is very concerned about, and requires the collaboration of the world at large. So the world today, from a political standpoint, is far more contentious than. Oh, but Karsten, sorry, we just lost power. So okay. Maybe we pause the recording for a bit here.
Okay, you're back online again.
Yeah. So maybe when you're editing, you can make an adjustment for that. But but anyway, I think this is not this.
Yeah, the lighting is not ideal, but we can continue the talking.
Of course,
or if you prefer, we can
come back in maybe in another 5 minutes.
Okay. So you're running on battery now.
Yes, yeah, but the power will be back shortly.
Yeah, I see that. That's good. You were talking about the world and the power competition
I think
between
it's a bit better now.
the USA and China, and you were talking about the climate also.
Yeah, so from that political standpoint, we've been evolving, or I say dynamic security compete several, several challenges. Whether we're looking at question over globalization and how globalization really serves the interest of the small players, also quote unquote the losers of of globalization in the last few decades. So all in all, I think we have to be very cautious and look at real systemic, the real systemic drivers of all of these confrontation, conflicts, and insecurity. If you address those issues, many of the problems that seem to be intractable can better be addressed. One of those core, uh, one of those core systemic issue is the emergence of China and either U.S. acceptance of China's emboldened and China's, global role, and also to move away from that Cold War mentality, which it is currently using in terms of its relationship with China, and also the reawakening of that same Cold War mentality, towards Russia as well. Because if we look at how the map of Europe has changed in terms of NATO, we've seen nothing short of an aggression, piece by piece by piece, from Western Europe towards Russia. So the problem in Ukraine today cannot just be addressed by merely having a sit down over Ukraine. There's a larger systemic issue that has to be addressed in terms of how these are the core these two core issues, whether U.S. Russia relations, U.S. China relations. If we have a way to sit down in it, whether at the G20 or whatever format that these great powers want to use, if we can resolve this core systemic issue of security competition, then many of the other issues of economy and balancing or no balancing will better be addressed. Because if you look at even the African continent, for instance, we already see that of the major conflicts we're facing, these major powers are also coming in, and that makes the conflict complex. A good example is the crisis we have in Libya, for instance. So in the Libyan crisis, you've got some of these foreign powers, Russia, the US via Europe, and France as well, and Turkey, all of these foreign powers, in that Libyan theater. That's something that if we have at the global and the systemic level better relations between these great powers, then each conflict is no longer an opportunity for pulling a fast one on the other. So conflicts become less politically complicated. So that's why whether economic, and also in the global economy as well. So many of the economic challenges we're looking at for post COVID-19 recovery, if we have a more collaborative attitude, which is only possible if we address the systemic issue, then you would find that the COVID-19 recovery will be far more swifter and more effective. And one key example in this recovery issue is the special drawing rights that has been so politicized that even a country like Africa, countries in Africa rather, are wondering how come at this critical moment in steps that can be taken at that global level and they're not being taken because of political differences and concerns, and it's slowing down the process. So the world today has so many complicated issues and conflicts, But for the world tomorrow to be better, there are key systemic issues that has to be addressed. So I don't know what you think about casting. Maybe you have a
I
different
agree
perspective from me.
I agree with your point, and I actually agree with all of it. People tend, and you mentioned the systemic issue of increased security competition between USA and China. What some people have called the Thucydides trap, because China is growing in power, and there's always the risk that the number one power, which has been USA, will try to make some kind of military conflict against the growing power before the growing power becomes as strong as themselves. And I do believe that this is exactly what is happening right now with Biden. Biden is trying all he can, and it was also visible with Trump, but Biden seems more determined, in my view, than Trump, because Biden is trying to get all the world involved in this. And people tend to forget what the Cold War was about, because the Cold War was really, in many ways, an ugly thing. I know from point of Europe, I just mentioned this because I think this is the risk which is coming to the world, including to Africa. What we had is, you remember the civil war in Angola, where the Russians were intervening on one side together with Cuba, and the United States and apartheid in South Africa were intervening on the other side. And this is exactly the kind of things which a Cold War is about. A Cold War is not a peaceful thing. A Cold War is an ugly thing. It's about war in Africa. It's about war in other countries. It's about dictatorships. I remember from the Cold War, and everybody can see in the history book, how many dictatorships in Asia and Africa and Latin America have been upheld in the name of anti-communism. And this is the danger. And you mentioned Libya as something which is, I think Libya is an important example of what you mentioned. Libya has been destroyed by, in my view, as I see it, by Western intervention. But putting Libya and North Africa together again will be very difficult if we have such a Cold War running in all the world.
No, that's very true, because the thing with Cold War is that conflicts that break out in what I like to call very strategic parts of the world, those countries in transitions, in zones between continents and regions, tend to become hyper politicized very quickly. So for instance, the NATO ousting of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, initially at 2011, there was less intervention at the time, because the world today is very different from where it was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. There was less competition, or there was less antagonism between, for instance, the US and Russia. And then other powers they're not as confident in their capacity to actually, go into Libya, choose a side, and see how they can use Libya as a pawn in the game of geopolitics. But what you find 10 years on is, the moment you started seeing actors and then fragmentation as well, then these foreign powers quickly come in and see how they can not just choose sides, but also insert their interests into the dynamic. And this risk always comes up. For instance, the death of Idris Deby in Chad. One of the big recently happened a few days ago, and then his son quickly took over, boycotting, or trashing the constitution, which actually requires a Speaker of Parliament for 40 days, but that has been circumvented, and then he has been elected the head of the military council. Immediately, the analysis coming out of Chad is what side will with France support? With France behind him, where with Qatar, align? Will with Turkey align with him or against him? Because that is the kind of international atmosphere we now have. Rather, instead of the analysis should be on how the succession and the transition can be made to be as smooth as possible. We're already seeing posturing. We're already seeing people trying to hijack the process and sort of make it hyper politicized. Yes, the political issue, but it needs not to be elevated beyond what it really is. The country lost its leader. There's what seemed to be a soft coup, but the primary issue has to be on that transition and that a succession plan led by Chadians themselves, and also with support from the economic community of Central Africa, and the African Union. We don't need that over internationalization of the transition process in Chad. The same thing also you find in Mozambique. Mozambique that's currently facing an insurgency battle or conflict rather in Cabo Delgado province, that's in northeast Mozambique. We're already seeing this talk of intervention from the US, talk of support for support or sort of antagonism towards foreign intervention. That is because we know that when you begin to over-internationalize these issues, you open up the country for further, occupation, conflicts, and a protraction of the conflict, really. So one of the things that we in Africa here, and better analysts or policy professionals and leaders are really looking at is how do we ensure that in each of these countries that were facing very real security threats, that the African agency is not only respected, but is central to the resolution of the conflict from the very beginning. So, for instance,
I just want to say I agree with you.
Issue. Yeah.
Just go on. I just wanted to intersect and say I agree 100% with you.
Exactly, because if you go back to the issue of Libya, you find out that in 2011, just before the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, I can remember very clearly the president of South Africa then, Jacob Zuma, who was the AU chairperson, actually made efforts to ensure that there was no NATO intervention, because there was this concern that if you take out Muammar Gaddafi, you are going to cause a regional security nightmare in the Sahel region and in West Africa, and that's the reality today. So even in Chad, with the death of Idris Deby, we are also seeing the same risk, where one leader who has been very central to keeping the multilateral and the multinational joint task force against Boko Haram, ISWAP, and all of these jihadi groups. When such a leader, whether he dies of natural causes or is no longer in position of power, we have to be very careful in the succession plan, taking into consideration the interest of the country itself and also the importance of that country and that country's security apparatus for regional security. That is why in the Mozambican issue, you would see that the SADC has been very careful to not come out very clearly to say we don't want an intervention from the US, but they've been avoiding it because they're not interested in it. South Africa has a very good military and an industrial base that can support a military operation. Why not focus on empowering the regional security forces to solve the problem, because they are the ones really at the front line, not some country from Europe or Asia or North America coming all the way down here where you don't really face a direct threat. So countries who are the frontline state, or they are the ones that should be steering these regional efforts, whether here in Africa or anywhere else in the world, even in Asia as well, with the Yemeni conflict, with that's the Saudi bombardment on Yemen that was going on for many years, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. We have to in the world tomorrow, for it to be more secure, we have to move towards regional security mechanisms. That is the best way to ensure that the interests of the states most impacted and the neighboring states are protected, and also to ensure that this conflict, these fault lines, don't become a theater for geopolitical competition. Because without regional security framework sort of locks out these great powers from security comforts, from security issues. But without regional security framework, you find that there will be no leadership around any issue, and that creates an opening for these great powers that are competing to sort of insert themselves into this conflict, and then hyper politicize it, and which makes this conflict go on and on and on and on. So I don't know what you think, particularly in the issue of Europe right now.
I agree with you 100% in everything you have said. Regions have to take their own and make their own security mechanisms, and it is so important for the reasons which you mentioned, that if regions do not take care of their own security in a regional security dynamic, exactly as you say, there will be great powers from east or west or north or everywhere who will see an interest, and they will very quickly, not later but sooner, right from the start, pervert the conflict in ways which they see fit for themselves, and all the damage that foreign powers can make in that process will not be paid by the foreign powers, but by you in the region.
Exactly.
And it is also a risk that some party in such a local conflict, or it can sometimes, I know, local in an African meaning is very relative, because most African conflicts are over very wide areas and involving a lot of countries. But that one party will suddenly ask for somebody from outside to come, and one party will ask this big power from this part to come, and another will then ask another one from the other part of the world to come, and soon you have the whole problem, and they will easily burn everything down. We saw that also during the Cold War in East Asia. We saw it in Vietnam. We saw it in Cambodia. We saw it with the genocide in Cambodia. 1 million people were killed out of 4 million, I think it was. It was horrible. And these great powers which we see today were all involved in that. And this is the sort of risk which we have with a new Cold War. It's not a small thing to play with. It's an ugly thing to play with. It also has, I mean, regional players, regional actors, they had to live with the consequences, but they also know, and the consequences is every kind of solution to a security problem has upsides and downsides, and different upsides and downsides for different players and actors in the conflict. But it's so important for the political process and for the peace and development process that those who are involved are those who make the decisions together, and not somebody else coming up and saying we in NATO or we in some other part of the world, we have the right opinion about how you should live in your region. No, this is false. You have the right opinions because you live there, and this is everywhere. Exactly. You have the right opinion because it's your life, it's your world, and it's your territory. And this is something I see. You mentioned also Afghanistan and Europe. I agree with you in this principle that this is where we should move the world everywhere. I mean, Europe is bound up with Russia. Russia is part of Europe.
Yes, it is part of Europe, and the idea that the idea that Russia is not a European country is political. It's not geographic.
Yeah, it's a political construction.
If you only need to look at and even you need to look at recent comments. I think they were,
You were falling out
it's very clear. You know, where with Russia and Europe today is the fact that you've got the US, that is not a European country, you know, convincing Europe to see Russia as foreign, or to see Russia as different from them, maybe because of the ideological
competition. So your stream was falling out now. So you're back again.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Try to continue where you left before,
many Europeans,
because
they don't see Russia as a European country, even if the geography says very clearly, and that's because of of course some of it lies in that ideological conflict, that shaped the Cold War and put that iron curtain, that very infamous or popular iron curtain. So that was ideological, but it's not geographic. And the fact remains, many of Europe's strategic needs, particularly energy, the future of Europe's energy security lies more with Russia than with the US. And if Europe can repair, with Russia, you would find that many of the so-called need for security would not be there. It's just like, for instance, today there's very little antagonism between France and, say, maybe the United Kingdom, but these were historic enemies.
yes,
For centuries, the French and the English fought and killed themselves. And
that's
today,
right.
If you ask French people who they consider to be the greatest threat to France, they are not going to mention the English. Likewise, the English will not mention France. So it shows that relationship between countries can change. But for this relationship to change, there needs to be a change in mindset. But the likes of NATO would find it difficult to justify their existence if Europe and Russia have a change of mindset and work, towards having a more peaceful relationship. So what becomes the purpose of NATO? I know this is something everybody has said. NATO will become obsolete if you create a more peaceful relationship between Europe and Russia. But I'm telling you, the relationship between Europe and Russia is not even determined by the Europeans, it's determined by the United States. You just see, for instance, the recent the Nord Stream 2, the threat of sanctions against Germany for Nord Stream 2 pipeline, a pipeline taking gas from Russia, one neighboring country, to another neighboring country, is suddenly a problem because a third party who is not even on the continent doesn't want
a country which is many thousand kilometers away over the ocean. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So the United States has no tolerance for peer competitors. It has gone to war with Imperial Germany, Imperial Japan, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union just for the sole purpose of eliminating any possible peer competitor. And that's exactly what it is doing today, with China. So we have to always look at US foreign policy through this, this reality. It's not anybody's construction, but it is the fact. So whether with Russia, whether with China, we have to look at these relationships, because these are the relationships the most important relationships that sort of set the temperature of international relations anywhere in the world.
I think it's also important to note that the world has changed fundamentally. Nazi Germany was an expansionist, ugly dictatorship, but we don't have something like that today. China is not Nazi Germany, and I think it is a gross exaggeration when somebody like Hillary Clinton accused Putin of being a new Hitler. This is what we don't need. Yeah, we laugh at it, but the Americans take themselves serious in these things, and that is the danger of it. And the communist world, the Soviet Union, does not exist anymore, and this ideology is also gone, probably forever. So a replay of these conflicts is not in order. And we have something more, which I think is very important, and which I think is an important background also for the audience of our conversation, is that the balance of the world in economic terms, and therefore also in education and in influence and in power, is changing radically these decades. In my view, there's no longer any third world. There are still some very poor countries, and there are still some very rich countries, but I don't see any third world like that. China used to be called a third world or second world, and today China is a very rich country. India was called a third world country, and today everybody talk about if India maybe in a number of years will be a bigger economy, not in 10 years, but maybe in 30 years, as big an economy as United States. And the same way I see in Africa, that Africa has had some difficult decades from 1960 and 3-4 decades from there after independence. These were new states which had to be established. But today there is a lot of development and a lot of things going on in Africa, and countries like many countries like Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, as you mentioned, have enormous high level of intellectual and economic capacity to run things and take a powerful place in the world. Not as somebody, coming back to your issue from before, not as somebody that Europeans and Westerns say, and United States say they want to come and defend and do this or that for, but a continent of very dynamic actors who can do their own thing. I think you were falling out, Ovigwe.